Hi guys, good morning. Welcome. We're going to be doing a little watercolor project. This is kind of geared towards beginning watercolor, but even if you guys have taken watercolor before, you can still practice these techniques. It's always good to sort of sharpen your skills when it comes to your watercolor um, techniques. So before we get terribly down the road, I want to talk a little bit about supplies and give you guys a chance to collect things so that we can get started painting. So we're gonna need some watercolor paper. So I am just using, I'll flip it around so you guys can see it. I'm using the Canson pad. I've been using this a lot with my teaching just because I feel like it's very affordable. It's a pretty good watercolor pad, but there are lots of watercolor papers out there and anything that you can get your hands on is great. So whatever you guys can grab, go ahead and do that. I even had some students who painted on like paper bags, and I've even tried a little bit on cardboard to be creative. So if that's all you have access to, that's great. That will work. The other things you'll need are a pencil. I'm using my mechanical pencil. We'll be using this a little bit today. You're going to need a watercolor brush. I'm using a Cheap Joe's Golden Fleece brush, but we've also linked, I think, several places, different kinds of brushes. But again, whatever you guys can get your hands on will be great. I will be using, for the purposes of today, a Crayola watercolor pack. I have to say, I used a little bit of a Crayola, I don't know, knockoff brand. The colors were not as good as the Crayola brand. So for what it's worth, if you have a chance or choice between a Crayola and a knockoff, I would use the Crayola. So I'm using that today for my paint. And then, yes, ma'am.
When you say the paints were not as good, specifically, what would one of us beginners notice that is not as good about it?
Good question. So you're not gonna be able to notice unless you've used other paints before, but the knockoff brands are not as pigmented, so the colors are not very bright at all. So you go to use them and it feels like you just can't get as bright as what it looks like it should be in the pan. So if you've never used paints before, that's one of the things that's different about lesser quality and higher quality paints is the pigment power. The pigment power can be pretty poor in some of the cheaper brands, but not all of them. There's some cheaper brands that have a pretty awesome pigment payoff. So that's what I say by not as good. The pigment just wasn't really there in the other knockoff brand of Crayola. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Great. Okay, last couple things that we're gonna need. Paper towel or some kind of dirty rag, whatever you have access to. I know some people don't wanna go through lots of paper towel. So if you don't, just use some kind of dirty rag. And then you're gonna need a container of water. So I have a container of water next to me. Now let's talk about setup really fast. I have all of my supplies on the right. You can't see them because they're off camera, but I have my paper towel, my water, and my paint all on the right side. Now, if you're a righty like me, that's going to be on the right. If you are left-handed, however, you're going to put everything on the left. And the reason for that is you're not crossing your picture over and over unnecessarily. So take the time right now to figure out, are you a righty or are you a lefty, and put it on the according side. All right, so I'll give you guys a chance to do that. And then we're going to talk really briefly about, in case this is your first time doing watercolor and you've never even touched them before, let's really briefly go through the different kinds of watercolor techniques there are. This is not all of them, but this is some of the most maybe common used watercolor techniques. So I'm gonna have all of you guys do, I'm gonna use half of my paper. So I'm actually gonna rip a piece off of my pad. And I'm gonna flip this around so I'm only using half. What I'm gonna have you guys do, you may use a ruler if you really want to, but I'm not. I'm just gonna freehand it. I'm gonna draw 4 rectangles on this half of the watercolor paper. So go ahead and I want you to start with that. Make them a good size, so not itty bitty, but enough room so that we actually have room to do 4. So it can be 4 rectangle boxes. Now again, if you guys have taken watercolor with me before, this doesn't mean that you don't have to do these. I think these are a really good exercise to continue doing. I use the illustration a lot in my classes. If anyone has taken any kind of sports or music, when you guys practice things, do you practice it once and then never do it again? Like I swung a bat once, I'm never going to swing a bat again. Or for me, I did soccer, so dribbling or different kinds of techniques on the soccer field. Do you do it once? Do you shoot a goal once? No, you do it more than once. Or later in my life, I've been doing martial arts. You know, we do techniques or patterns and such, and we practice them hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. It's really no different. You guys should be practicing these techniques many times. Okay, so I have my 4 little rectangles here, and I'm going to just write on them different things that I'm going to do in my boxes. So this first one is going to be a dry wash. The second one is going to be a wet wash. The third one will be wet into wet. And I'll save the last one maybe for something different. Okay, so let's talk about how to get your paint ready. So to start with these little exercises, I'm not gonna have you care which color you grab because I don't think it really matters. If you have a watercolor palette like me, which are called pans, because it's actually in a little tiny little pan like this, if that's the paint that you have, you're gonna have to really rehydrate this in order to make it work. If, however, some of you may have watercolor that comes in a tube like this. If you have watercolor that comes in a tube, you're actually gonna have to pour a little bit out. So if I get a little bit of paint, I'm just gonna put a little bit in the pan here so you can see it. It's very wet, it's kind of gooey, sticky. I'll show you how to use both of them. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna dip your brush into your water, and I'm first gonna grab a little bit of the pan paint. So I'm gonna swirl it around until it kind of rehydrates the paint. And then I'm gonna take my loaded brush onto my palette. I'm just using the lid as my palette, and I'm making a puddle. Before you do any kind of painting, you need to always make a puddle of paint on your palette first. Okay, so you don't just grab, well, I don't say ever. I do it sometimes, but for the sake of keeping the rules simple in the beginning, always put it on your pan first. So here's my puddle over here using the pan. Now, if I'm using this guy, I'm gonna wash my brush out. I don't scoop him. I just take a little bit off the edge because a little bit goes a very long way with the watercolor that's in the tubes. So just a little bit. And again, you can keep grabbing more until you get the desired pigmentation power. So that just is how dark the pigment will go. Okay, so I have 2 puddles now. I have one using my tube of watercolor, and I have one using my pan. So you may use whatever color you want, but now let's start talking about a little bit about the techniques. So this first one, dry wash. So there are different reasons to use different techniques on any kind of painting. In particular, we'll be talking about the differences between dry and wet wash. A dry wash means you do not wet the paper first. So I'm going to take the red puddle that I made. I'm going to load it up in my brush. And then all I'm going to do is take my brush directly to the paper and begin painting side to side. I might get a couple passes, like I think this is about my 3rd or 4th pass before you need to grab more paint. Because if you go too many times back and forth, you have less paint each time you go back and forth. So you need to make sure that you grab more. Now it also depends on the size. If my rectangle was really big, like this big, I might only get 1 pass before I would have to grab more paint. Just kind of depends. Something I tell all my students as well is about the halfway mark, which I have at this point passed, you shouldn't go back up to the top and fix a mistake that you made because it's more prone to really bad streaking in your painting if you go back and try to like fix something that you made. I tell my students, especially with the cheaper paper, and this is not like hard, fast rules that you could never, ever break, but in the beginning, I like to try to lay down this foundation of not doing this, especially because there's paper and paint and all those things make a difference on the look of your painting. When you're painting this, you can either fix a mistake either A, immediately, like you see you did something wrong or you missed a spot, go and fix it right away. Or if you've missed the immediately, then you have to wait until it's dry and then you can try to fix the mistake then. So either immediately upon noticing that you made the mistake, or you have to wait until after it's dried. Okay, so that was a dry wash. Now, a wet wash is going to be exactly the same thing, except that you're going to wet the surface first with water. So I'm going to take a little bit of water. You don't need a lot of water. So sometimes I see with my students, there's almost like standing water in there. You don't need that much water. It just should be moist and damp, but it shouldn't necessarily be a huge standing puddle of water in it. So one of the reasons, or there's actually quite a few. One of the reasons you would use a wet or a dry wash is if you're wanting to do a small area with maybe a little bit more control involved with it, I would do a dry. But if you're doing a large area, I would do wet. And one of the reasons I would do it with wet is because when you wet the surface of your paper first, you are going to slow the drying time of your paper. So as you begin to watercolor more and more, what you'll notice is once you've wetted the paper and you start painting, that's part of the reason I don't want you to go back and fix something. The water begins to soak down into your paper. And when it does that, and you keep touching it, you can leave little streaks and such in your painting. But when you wet it first, you slow that drying time, and it increases what I call your playtime. More time for you to go back and fix things, and change things or add in more paint. It just increases that time. So wet into wet, or wet wash, I should say, just gives you more time to paint, which is part of the reason I like it. The other reason I like it is because if you've noticed, when you painted the wet one versus the dry one, when you paint, your paint will follow wherever the water has gone. So it's a lot of nice little things to the wet wash. I probably use the wet wash the most, especially in the beginning of my paintings. But then I use maybe more dry wash if I want more detail, or if I want more depth, like darkness. If you want darkness, you need more dry. All right, we're moving into wet. And this is the technique that we will be using in our next project. So this is the one I want you to really be practicing. That's why I left this one open. We may just try it one more time just so you have the practice. So wet into wet starts exactly the same as the wet wash. You're going to wet your box, just the same as you did last time. But while we're filling this in, I want you to be thinking, we're actually going to be using 2 colors this time. So I'm going to continue using my red because that's what I have out, but I'm going to grab also one other color. And so when you grab another color, you need to make sure you mix a puddle on your palette. So I'm going to use maybe blue. So I'm going to get a blue puddle prepared on my palette. Now I'm going to start with my red, and I'm just going to kind of sporadically put it through my painting. Now wash my brush out, and I'm going to grab my blue. And then I'm going to put my blue into these little holes. Now I'm going to wash my brush out in between. I know you can't see it's off camera. I'm washing my brush out in between each time because when I go into these little holes, I'm picking up the red and it's turning purple, and I want it to stay clean. So I'm washing my brush each time. Okay. Now the goal of wet into wet, you guys, is that as these 2 colors dry, there should be no harsh lines. It should dry really softly. So that should be always your goal in your head with wet into wet, is it shouldn't dry very harshly. And we'll see that more clearly when we do this one. So this one I did very sporadically. This one I'm actually going to cut down the middle. So I'm going to wet it one more time. I'm doing exactly the same step, but we're just doing it a little differently. I wetted it. You'll see more clearly the whole line illustration if I cut this down diagonally. I'm going to do this half blue and the other half red. And this one, I said more clearly, you'll be able to see right away whether or not your paper was wet enough when you did it. Because if it wasn't wet enough, you'll get a very harsh line. And if it was wet enough, it'll be very soft where the 2 colors meet. Okay. So what I'm looking for the 2 boxes on the bottom, you guys, this is going to be our wet into wet ones. I want one on the side to be random. So you just randomly put colors through there. And then this one, you're going to have it cut diagonally. And I want them to meet and have them be drying softly where they touch. Okay, so that was our little exercise just so that we have something to practice and have in our brains if we've never even tried watercolor before. And now it gives us ready to start painting a little painting. Oh, Miss Gia, can you hear my dog?
It's okay.
I'm sorry. He's whining over there. We'll see. I might actually have to take him outside if he keeps whining. I'm sorry. Okay. So we're going to be drawing, you guys, is an apple. Now, this is where a little bit of our drawing comes in, I know, and everyone's apple will be a little bit different, and that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm making my apple a little bit more circular or more heart-shaped, but some people drew their apples kind of long, kind of like, what are those ones? Red Delicious or something like that. Kind of looks like that apple, but I'm going to make mine more heart-shaped. So if it's easy for you, I want you to kind of think of it like a heart. Miss Gia, I might draw my apple and then go take my dog out and come back if that's okay.
I think that's fine. We'll all be drawing.
That's what I figured. So you guys draw your apple while I tie my dog outside. All right. Start drawing your apple and I'll be right back, you guys, because my puppy he's a whining. Right back. And I made mine a little extreme. I might pull mine up a little bit. But there's usually a dip at the top of your apple. Just a little bit. Make sure you guys are making a little bit of a dip. And then right where the dip is, that's where I'm going to put a little line. This is my very, very simplified apple. I'm going to put a line, and that is where our little stem is going to come out of. Now, usually the stem is a little bit fatter towards that edge right up there, up the top, and then gets a little bit thinner as it comes down and touches the apple. So make sure you draw a little bit of a stem, and then I'm actually going to pop a leaf on there too. Just one. Kind of like that. And I'm going to make mine tinier. You can give your leaf a stem or not. I'm not. It'd probably look nicer with the stem, but I'm not going to do that.
Miss Anna?
Yes.
Is there any way, I don't want to make your working area uncomfortable, but is there any way to see your watercolor palette while you're working on this?
I think so. Let me move my paper down and then. There you go. Okay. Does everyone have their apple drawn? Okay, no one's saying no, so I'm going to assume yes. So what I'm going to have you do now is decide at this point if you want your apple to be red or green. I'm going to make mine green, but if you guys want to do this red, the same, we'll keep the steps will be exactly the same, except that when I'm painting with green, you'll be painting with red instead, okay? So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to actually make a little mark with my pencil just so you can see it. You can either add the pencil mark in or not. That's totally up to you. There's going to be a little highlight right here towards the upper right corner of the apple. I'm putting it in just so you can see it. I think it looks better if you don't draw it in, but I want you to clearly see where it is. So that's why I drew it for you. So there's going to be a highlight right here. This is where no paint's going to go. Okay, so no paint in your little highlight. What I'm going to do now is we're going to take our water. So I've loaded my brush up with just water. We're going to paint the whole apple except that little highlight. Don't put it in there. We're gonna paint the whole apple with just water. So if you remember, when we did those little exercises, do you remember how I said that wherever you put the water down, that's where the paint will go? That's why we're leaving it out of the highlight, because if I put the water into the highlight, the paint would go there too. Now, this is an oversimplified apple, I know, but this is just a nice, simple way, I think, to get into painting wet into wet and practicing those techniques. I have all my students do this kind of exercise over and over and over. Okay, so it's nice and wet now. Now I'm gonna grab yellow. So I'm getting my brush ready. I'm gonna get up some yellow, rehydrate it, take it over onto my palette. And now I'm gonna cover my whole apple, except for the highlight, with yellow. Now, something that I notice with the Crayola paints, and you guys are gonna have to just get used to familiarize yourself with your paints. These Crayolas, though they are more pigmented than the off-brand, they're still not super pigmented. So I grab yellow quite frequently because it's just not strong enough unless I grab more paint. So we're doing wet into wet, you guys. So as soon as I finish the yellow layer, I'm gonna start adding in my green. Now this is the point to where if you want your apple to be more red, it will turn a little orange. But if you want it a little more red, you're gonna have to use the red, not the green. So I'm gonna use my green pigment and I'm swirling it and rehydrating it. Now I'm not gonna go all the way across. I'm gonna go about maybe halfway. I'm adding in my green. You will see I'm moving kind of fast. The slower you go, the more at risk you are of the paint drying on you, and that's when we get lots of weird little lines. Now, I don't know that this is gonna dry super great, so I'm actually gonna wash my brush out. I'm grabbing more yellow, and I'm gonna come touching it right along this perimeter because I'm not sure that's gonna dry the way I want it to. So I'm just grabbing more yellow and trying to make that maybe a bit softer. Now, these are not the paints that I used when I painted this the first time. So this is gonna look a little bit different than it did the previous time. Now I want this to be darker over here because that's gonna be where more of the shadow is. So I'm grabbing more green. I'm actually gonna add blue to the mixture. And because my blue is hot in the Crayola paints, I'm adding a little bit of brown. If you guys are doing this with red, you still wanna add the blue in there. It will just make it slightly purple. You guys can see I keep making my puddle over and over and over. Every time you go to grab your puddle, especially with these paints, I find that it makes it, it dilutes it, it makes it a lot lighter. And I really need that pigment, so I'm re-grabbing the paint pretty often. So what I tell a lot of my students with watercolor painting, especially when we're doing a lot of wet into wet, is you guys need to practice not over touching it. So I'm still painting, so about the time that I'm done painting, you should be done painting. Because if you paint too long, your paper can get what's called overworked. And you're just gonna have to get used to seeing what it looks like. It kind of, the paper sort of pills and gets these little balls on it. And then if you keep painting it, it will ruin the paper and you'll get this like, I don't wanna say scratch, but kind of, and it just, you can't fix it, you can't go back. This happens faster on cheaper or lower quality papers, so you just have to be more mindful about not overworking it. Besides, I think watercolor looks its most beautiful when you don't overwork it anyway. So I have just painted my whole apple, and I think I'm about done, you guys. If I keep going with this, I think I'm just gonna make a mess, especially with the Crayola paints. I'm not sure if I keep doing more that this layer won't look like a mess. So I'm gonna leave it alone. I am, however, going to go to my leaf. So if you guys are also at this point where you're done with your apple, I want you to paint your leaf. So you're going to do exactly the same steps that we did with our apple. You're going to fill in your leaf with water first, then you're going to add your yellow, and then you're going to add some green. So same steps. While I let that guy dry. Miss Gia.
Yes.
Do we have time to start another one? I'm asking because I did not instruct people to get a hairdryer. So I think I can just let this one dry for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then we can come back and finish the stem, but we'd have to start another one. Do we have time?
Yes, it's only 11:05, so you have 25 whole minutes before we're even scheduled to be done.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to let this sit because mine's really wet, you guys. Okay, so I'm letting my apple sit to dry. So normally if I was working in my own studio or, I don't know, maybe more the advanced classes, I have you guys use a hairdryer to blow dry the layer, and then we'll come back and we'd paint more. But I'm not, we're gonna let it air dry. So I'm actually gonna move mine off to the side and I'm gonna start a pear. So you guys get to dual paint, which sometimes I have my students do this too. If there is a lack of hair dryers available, I'll have people work on more than one project. That way, while one is drying, you could be working on something else. So the pear is going to be a little bit more involved with our drawing because it's actually going to be 2 pieces. And I'll show you what I mean. It's kind of like a snowman without a waist. So if you guys are ready, you could either use the other half of your paper or grab a new piece. I grabbed a new one just because I didn't want to cross over my picture and put my hand in my apple. So what I'm going to do is actually draw 2 circles, you guys. I'm going to draw one at the top that's little, and then one at the bottom that's a little bit bigger. That's kind of why it looks like a snowman just without the waist. So I'm going to draw 1 circle here. And same thing with the apple, you guys. Try to make them decent sized. If they are too little, it just won't take you very long to paint this. Oh, another thing I didn't talk about last time, you guys. When you are painting and drawing for your watercolor, when you're drawing, make sure you draw lightly, because anything that you do too darkly, first of all, you can't erase it. It just stains the paper and you can dent the paper. And secondly, you don't want to draw too hard because then you can't erase it from the standpoint that if you watercolor it, once you watercolor over graphite, it kind of seals it down there and you're not going to be able to get it out. So make sure you draw lightly. As you can see, I'm just erasing some of my circle because I didn't like how it looked. Okay, when I draw my circle, now I'm going to draw another one that's bigger and I'm going to have it tuck right underneath that little one. He kind of looks like, what's that robot in Star Wars? It's kind of what it looks like. Okay, so here's my 2 little balls, right? One on the top is little and then one on the bottom is a little bit bigger. Now here's how this is how I cheat to help some of my beginner students draw the pear. You can always draw this freehand. I just think this is a nice little trick if you're not comfortable with drawing. So if I've drawn my 2 circles here, now I'm going to do is give it a waist. So if I follow the line of my circle, right where these 2 have this little triangle cut out, I'm going to give it a little waist. Come in and then back out into my big circle. Same thing with this side. Follow this circle, give it a little waist, and then come back out. Now, all of this gets erased. That's part of the reason I had you guys draw lightly, because if you don't, these circles will be stuck in there forever. This is an oversimplified pear shape, but I think this is a really good way to help it be simple for you guys if you're not comfortable drawing, which some people aren't in the beginning. Okay, so now some of my lines disappeared too much, so I'm just going to go back and redraw some of the lines. Okay, so mine actually, I think in my opinion, looks a little bit more like a gourd at this point. So I might actually change the shape at the top just a little bit. So one of the things I can do, this is just for me. If you want to leave it the way it is, that's fine. If you guys want a little more, I don't know, a little bit more looking like a pear, you can change this with me. I'm actually going to chop off the top here a little bit because I don't think it needs to be that circular. And then I'm actually going to make mine a little bit more subtle with its shape right here. So I'm going to erase and fix this.
Just see if you can see this, John.
Okay, so my pear is now no longer perfectly straight or perfectly circular at the top, I should say.
Miss Anna,
Yes.
I wanted to mention while you're working on that I am using only cardstock because I didn't have watercolor paper handy.
Oh, excellent.
White cardstock, and I don't know if you can see, but I think that's exactly what you're talking about the pilling.
Mm-hmm.
All these tiny little.
Yes, that's exactly it. So everyone look up really quick and see that. That is exactly what I meant, Miss Gia. That's pilling. Your paper has, yep, it has absorbed, your paper absorbs a lot of the water, right, when you're painting it. And then as your brush is going over it, you're destroying the paper fibers.
I did not paint very much at all.
I believe you.
But it just rolls right up. And then if you can look over here, this is me trying to wipe off some of the pills onto my palette. It was a lot, but I just barely got it wet and then touched it. And then it's just soaking the paper, which is why you would have specially treated paper.
Yes.
If you're going to do watercolor.
Yes. Thank you for showing that, because actually I don't have any cardstock with me, so I couldn't show it for you guys. If I was painting on cardstock, which I have once, I painted on it once, you have to paint like one stroke of water and then you leave it. Like you can't touch it anymore. If you touch any more than it's not designed to take water. That's part of the reason. But it will still work. It just probably means you guys have to brush your paper 10 times as less than we do, just because your paper just literally cannot take it. But thank you for showing that. That was a really good visual aid for what I'm saying and you can't see it. Okay, so I'm coming back to my pear. So I finished my shape and I'm pretty happy with it, you guys. I'm now going to draw a stem. The stem is going to be the same as with the apple. It's thicker at the top here, and then it's a little bit thinner as it comes down and touches the pear, okay? Now I'm making my pear, the stem, be behind my pear. That's why you don't see it down here. You could always make it come into your pear. You just need to give it a little bit of a, like little scoop under there. And then all of a sudden now it's in my pear. So you can change however you would like it. I actually think that looks better with it in front. So I'm gonna put mine in front. And then same thing, I'm gonna do a little leaf here. I'm gonna make mine sit slightly behind my pear. So it's gonna be right here. But you may put your leaf wherever you would like. Okay, now, since my apple is still drying and we're gonna be working on my pear a little bit, let's talk about the highlights. There are actually gonna be two highlights in this one. You're gonna have one little one towards the upper part of the pear and then a little one towards the bottom of the pear. Now again, this will look better if you guys don't draw it like I am. I think it looks better if you just sort of freehand it. But if you need the visual aid, just draw it in, okay? So those are the two spots that we're not gonna fill in with paint. All right, so this is gonna be repeated. The only difference this time is that we're actually gonna be doing orange on this pear, not green. I want you guys to see something. You see how my palette, because it's so tiny, I'm kind of messy in here. Here's where you guys need to learn how to clean off your palette. And I clean my palette off a lot. Take a little bit of paper towel or your rag. I'm gonna dip mine in just a little bit of water. And I'm going to wipe out the paint because I need a clean space to work. I had one teacher of mine say, and it just stuck with me. She was like, would you rather have, because some people don't like it because like, oh, I made all these colors. I don't want to waste the colors. She was like, you either waste a painting or you waste some paint. I would rather waste some paint. So wipe out the colors that you don't need. Okay, so now that that's ready, let's start working on our pear. Okay, so we're gonna start off exactly the same as we did with the apple. I want you guys to wet the whole surface with water first, excluding our little highlights. So what Miss Gia showed with her painting is an interesting topic about paper. So I told you guys at the beginning that whatever you guys can get your hands on will work great. And that is totally the truth, and that still applies. So what you get with different kinds of papers is, I think I talked about this last week, but we'll talk about it again today. The watercolor paper comes in what's called pounds. So typically, like what I'm working on right here, I think this is 140-pound paper, which is pretty low, but there's a lot of watercolor artists that do amazing paintings on just 140-pound paper. There is a watercolor paper out there, I forget the brand offhand, that's 90-pound paper. That's pretty bad. Like it's sort of like painting on regular paper. So just bear that in mind. You can still use it. You can still get things out of it. But if it's behaving oddly to you, it's probably not you, it's probably the paper. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I've just painted the whole thing with water. Now I'm gonna grab my yellow, so I'm gonna make a puddle. And I'm gonna paint my whole pear, except for the highlights, with just yellow. So anyway, that's one of the things that you'll start to discover as you guys paint more, is even within the pounds. So this is 140-pound paper. There's a brand of paper I like to use better than this that's also 140-pound paper, but it's a much better quality paper. And what you'll end up finding is some techniques are just so much easier to do on nicer paper. So in the beginning, just use whatever you have. It's just a good place to start. But at some point, if you really love watercolor and you want to continue doing it, maybe consider, changing your paper up and trying something different. I even did at one point like a little test for my students. I did 2 paintings with the same paint, but different paper. And the quality of even the colors were so much better on the higher quality paper than on the lower quality paper. And it wasn't the paint, it was just the paper. Okay, so I've just painted the whole thing in yellow, you guys. Now I'm gonna make orange. Now, you can either use orange straight out of the pan, which this is my orange, right out of the pan, out of Crayola, which I might use that one too. If for some reason you don't have orange, you're just gonna mix together red into your yellow, and you will get orange. So whichever you have on hand, go ahead and use that. I'm gonna put my orange in mostly to the bottom and the left side. Let's try a little bit of this. Yeah, it's a little bit lighter. I'm also gonna come in a little bit. I'm almost like imagining like if this is where my little pear's waist is, I'm gonna add a little bit of orange right there. Now, the same problem is occurring that it did with the last apple. I'm not sure I love these edges, so I'm gonna grab some more yellow. I'm washing my brush out. And I'm grabbing fresh color to kind of blend into that orange. And then I think my orange is still not dark enough, so I'm gonna keep trying to amp it up. How's everybody doing? Especially my new students. Do you guys have any questions or any problems that are coming up that you need help with?
Thumbs up from Anna.
Thumbs up from Anna, good. It'll be fun to see, Anna, what your pear and your apple look like, because I'm sure you're using different paints than you did the first time you did this. Because I think I asked you, but I don't remember what your brand of paint is that you're using, Anna. Now I'm going to use a little bit of brown, you guys, because I'm not super happy with how dark this is getting. So I'm adding a little bit of brown into my mix, and I'm coming towards the bottom and just adding a little bit more depth because it wasn't getting me enough. I'm also running out of time. I really try to give myself about a minute or so working with this before I stop. Because like I said, if I keep going, just like what happened to Miss Gia's, mine will happen at a later time. Like mine might happen at about a minute or two. So I think that's gonna be good. I could probably do more, but I don't want to risk my paper getting munged up. If some of my students who have taken watercolor before are watching today, I would love to see you guys trying this one again, because it's always good to see how much, how much you've improved, how much you've grown, because I bet you your pear and your apple will not look the same compared to the first time that you did it. Okay, I think I'm gonna leave that for now. So then while that is drying, I'm actually gonna give me a little bit of shadow on the ground just because I think that would look kind of cool. I'm gonna grab some purple and some brown. Bonus question for anybody watching that has taken painting with me before. Do you know why I'm using purple? No guesses?
Is it just a complementary color to the yellow?
Yes, it is. If you guys look at a color wheel, which I don't have one near me, if you get a chance to look at a color wheel, purple is directly across from yellow. So sometimes, and you guys should just tuck this away from when you're doing your own little paintings, even just for fun at home. If you're painting a picture and you're wondering, what should I make the background? Well, consider putting in what its opposite is on the color wheel. It's complementary, it's called. And if you're not sure, look up a color wheel and you can find out what the complementary color is. All right, so I just put like a little bit of purple back here just because I wanted something on the ground. Okay. All right, you guys, I am gonna swap out my pear because I think that's about all I can do on that one for now. And I'm gonna grab my apple again and I'm gonna work on my stem. So if I'm looking at my apple, it's a little damp. I don't know if it can show up on the camera. I can see, and one of the ways you can tell is how glossy it is. So I don't know if it's gonna show up. There we go, a little bit. Can you see how glossy it is, you guys? Still got a little sheen to it. The sheen means it's still pretty wet. I'm gonna try anyway, just because I wanted to do this with you guys, but you really shouldn't be painting if it's glossy. But I'm going to anyway. So I'm gonna get some brown together. And I'm gonna paint this inside of my little stem. And I just using brown. I think I just got it dirty with some of the orange. Okay. I'm gonna add a little bit of blue to my brown. And I talk about this a lot with my students. I routinely put, brown into blue or blue into brown. It not only darkens up the color, but in blue's case, if you are painting with blue and it's too intense, if you add a little bit of brown to it, it just sort of earths it up a little bit. There we go, I like that. That looks good. I don't know, maybe I'll take the risk on my pear too, you guys. It might bleed, but let's just go for it. So for all my new students, did you guys finish either the pear or the apple? And if you did, do you want to share it so we can see how it looks? I'm going to paint my leaf on my pear. If it bleeds a little bit, I'm okay with that. Sometimes bleeding in a painting actually can look kind of neat. So I'm going to just go for it and take the risk that it might bleed a little.
Is there somebody who wants to show their picture? Oh, I see somebody there. Hold on. Hold them up. Hold it up. Oh,
Oh, you guys, that looks good.
Oh,
Nice. Really pretty.
nice.
I like it. Are you guys gonna put a leaf in, or you guys want to leave a leaf out?
I don't want to.
Leave it out.
Yours? Nope. No leaf.
That looks good, you guys.
Thanks.
Does anybody else have one that they want to show?
Lydia has one.
Hold it up, Lydia, and give us a few seconds. It takes us about 5 seconds before it.
Lydia, do you want to hold yours up? No.
No. That'd be a negatory. That's okay. Anna, is any one of yours in a good place? Ooh.
Oh, wow.
Ooh.
Nice.
I like it a lot, Anna. Yeah, what are your paints, son? I probably asked you, but I think I forgot.
I'm not sure what the brand is. I know that it has something to do with a horse.
Something to do with a
That's
horse.
all I know.
Okay, I can't think offhand what the horse is, but I will say, just from looking at your painting, the paints seem to be pretty good quality enough to get, so good job. I like it looks smooth, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Do we have anybody else that wants to show their paintings? I don't know who else is out there.
I don't see any other paintings wanting to be shown, but I did want to mention that Anna is one of our more experienced students, and that's probably accounting for the quality. Plus, she has different quality paints and papers, but Anna is, she's not Miss Anna, our student Anna, who just showed her work. This is not her first watercolor, so don't be discouraged, because I am a beginner and I know it's easy for me to feel a little discouraged because I've got my paper pilling and I don't know how to draw an apple, and it's like, it's okay to start where you are and learn, and don't be discouraged that advanced students are getting farther and looking more realistic than yours, because she's got several years more experience than a beginner. Just like Miss Anna, she has so much more experience. Her stuff always looks rather intimidating sometimes, because I hold mine up and go, oh, mine's nowhere near that, but it's okay. We're gonna keep learning.
Well, what I like, so I'm using the Crayola paints today, you guys, because mine looks different than even like Miss Anna's that we saw. The quality paints are different. So these are with the Crayola, and I've been painting with lots of different kinds of paints before, and I will say they work. These work. They're a little more challenging to use. So I always want to try to let people know, if you're having challenges, that it could be due to your paint or paper. So just keep up with it. Keep practicing. You will get better. Always. Doesn't matter what kind of paint or paper you use. But I will say that paper and paint does affect. So if you feel like you're having a challenge, always shoot me a question too, because you can always let me know like what paints you're using or what paper you're using, and seeing if maybe the difficulties that you're running into could be just materials. And then that just means you just need to keep going, keep practicing. Okay, so this is my finished product with the Crayola. Like I said, I'm not mad at it, considering that it's Crayolas and I haven't painted with these really ever, I think, since I was probably a little girl. It's not bad. So I want to give you guys a sneak peek of what we're going to be working on later this afternoon. So this is going to be the project for is it 12:30, Miss Gia? Is that correct?
12:30, that's correct.
Okay, so at 12:30 today, you guys, we will be painting this door. So again, I painted this using the Crayola paints. So I just want to let you know, if you have a better quality of paint, this will probably turn out even better than mine. But this is what I did with the Crayola paints. So I was able to still get quite a bit of the techniques that I wanted it to do. I was not mad at it at all. Do you see all these little cool little textures? This is all from salt. So if you guys have it, I want you guys to grab some salt. I have a lot of kosher salt here. So kosher is that really thick grained salt. If all you have is table salt, it will work. It just won't look the same. So make sure that you guys, if you have the option and mama lets you, grab some kosher salt. So I have some kosher salt that was needed. You're also going to need a ruler, which I don't have one near me apparently. You're going to need a ruler. You're going to need a pencil. And then I actually inked this. So if you guys want to look like it does in this project right here, see if you can find yourself a pen. Ideally, the pen you're using should be waterproof, but if it's not, we'll talk about it later. There'll be just different steps for you if you don't have a pen that's waterproof. But you need to make sure if you have the choice that you grab a waterproof pen. Okay, you guys. Oh, and a hair dryer. So usually for all of my more intermediate and advanced projects, we will be using a hair dryer because in order to get this done in about an hour, we're gonna have to blow dry some layers. Okay, guys? Okay, so unless there's any other questions, that was all I had for you guys today for the beginning watercolor projects. But if you guys are interested, even if you are still a beginner, you can do this project with us later. So you guys can join in about an hour, it looks like at this point, and we will be working on the door.